My name is Jim Simpson, and we're here to talk about knives. And very specifically, we're talking about knives when carried by an over-the-road semi-trucker. Not that we're only part-time trucker, I mean full-time trucker, but we're driving a semi, so we're semi-truckers. It's complicated, don't worry about it. I need to explain that we have some specific problems when it comes to carrying knives. And that is, we have to try to live under the laws of pretty much all 50 states, well, lower 48 probably, possibly Canada as well. I'm going to hit briefly on them. And New York City, which is, as we'll discuss, particularly troublesome. How do you stay legal in all of those jurisdictions? And that's part of what we're going to talk about. And so I believe that a knife intended for carry by a trucker has to fit a certain mold. It has to fit within certain legal definitions that are accepted pretty much anywhere. And it has to be arguably tied to what a trucker does daily. So let me show you a few examples of do's and don'ts. We're going to start with New York City knife law. And it's very strange. It works like this. Knives up to about 4-inch can be carried openly or concealed. The biggest problem is that folding knives of perfectly ordinary type, your average Benchmade, any kind of halfway decent folding knife from 3 inches on up, could easily get you a felony charge. And you're thinking, what? Well, yeah. It goes like this. New York City Police Department and the prosecutors have decided that if you take an ordinary folding knife, and I'll use this Gerber suspension multiplier as a stand-in because I don't have any other folding knife on me, but it'll do as a stand-in because it has a stud right here that you push on to open the blade, and it is a lock blade. If I take these two little things here and pull them back, it closes. Okay, so we're going to use that as a stand-in for a lock blade. Well, on this one, I cannot flick it with my wrist and flick it open because the blade is being so short, about 2.5 inches, and so light, doesn't have enough mass to be swung open. Plus, the lock work makes it very tight opening. But any reasonable, typical, everyday pocket knife you find everywhere else in America can generally be flipped open if you try hard enough. And some of the cops have gotten very good at trying hard enough and making them pop open. The moment they do, that is a felony switchblade bust. I'm really not kidding about this. They've been doing this a lot. And they'll do it to anybody they can come across, regardless of skin color, age, anything. Because the incentive systems for the NYPD are such that any felony bust they make is a big attaboy on their career path. I suspect there may be an even bigger problem where truckers are concerned. There have been reports over the years of members of the NYPD taking bribes from tow truck companies for getting them business. And if they can haul away a semi-truck, that's $1,500 to $2,000 in the tow truck company's pocket. The kickback to a particular cop could run into the hundreds of dollars. So I suspect that if anybody has to avoid that problem, it would be truckers. And that means you are actually better off with a fixed blade knife, which I've got 3 examples here, as opposed to a folder, which is strange. Now let's compare and contrast with California. In California, there is a legal distinction made between folding knives and fixed blade knives. If it's a fixed blade, then it is a readily available stabbing implement. That's what California calls it. And therefore, it must be carried openly. A folding knife that's concealed in the folded position a folding knife carried in the closed position can be concealed because it's not a readily available stabbing implement. And there's a bunch of very complicated stuff as to what is and is not a switchblade. Years ago, I wrote an entire article on how California knife law works. I will link to it below. And then in, I believe it was 2013, but I can't remember off the top of my head, there was a court decision that finally, it was an appellate court decision in California, finally shut down the whole idea of cops declaring folding knives switchblades just because they could be flipped open. So it took over a decade between the time the law was written for the courts to finally 100% clarify. I'll give a link to that decision below. It'll give you an example of how complicated this stuff is. And it's not any surprise that the guy who was busted in that case, by the way, was young and brown. He was Latino American of some type. I don't know exactly what country he came from, but based on his surname, he was most likely Latino. And they tried to pop him for a felony. And the courts finally said no. No. But unfortunately, that same thing is going on in New York. And I'll throw one more out there as far as folding knives. Maryland, if you have an assisted opening folding knife, and the way those work is you start to push the blade open, and then when it gets to about here, about a quarter of the way, let's say, somewhere in there, a spring kicks in and flicks it the rest of the way open. That's called an assisted opening knife. In most of America, those are not switchblades, but in Maryland, they are. Maryland has one more funky thing, and this is where we get more closely tied to trucking. They say that they want you to have some kind of good reason to have a knife on you, as opposed to self-defense. They want you to have a work-related reason or a hobby-related reason. If you're going fishing or something, they got no problem with that. So part of what I've chosen to carry, and we're going to get into that in a minute, is a knife that I can clearly label an automotive crash rescue tool. In other words, the kind of knife I can use to cut a seatbelt, smash my way through a windshield, and get myself out of trouble or get somebody else out of trouble. A long-haul trucker drives up to 120,000 miles or more a year. So we see some crap. Eventually, every cop knows this, by the way, eventually a trucker ends up being the first responder at a crash scene. Happens often enough that it's just a thing. So if you have a knife that can be labeled as a post-crash rescue tool, then you have, in a state like Maryland, a good legal excuse for having the bloody thing on you. And I also took a look at Canada. And across all of Canada, it's exactly like Maryland, except cranked up to 11. So they want you to have some kind of business reason. And again, for a long-haul trucker, I believe that post-crash rescue would be the kind of excuse that a street cop might listen to, especially if you're otherwise reasonable. One difference, however, between Maryland and Canada. In Maryland, like most of the rest of the U.S., well, pretty much all the rest of the U.S., if you are attacked with a lethal weapon and you draw a knife to defend yourself and end up using it, you're going to be okay. Under typical American law, if you have a reasonable fear of losing your life or suffering great bodily injury from a criminal assault, you can defend yourself with deadly force. And yes, a knife qualifies as deadly force, no question. So, in America, including even the really bad states like New York, Connecticut, Maryland, and such, you're going to be okay if you use a knife against somebody attacking you with, let's say, a claw hammer, which I've actually had to face down in California when I used to live there. 4 lunatics tried to kill some guy right in front of me. I managed to get them off. Turns out 2 of them had claw hammers and were attempting to kill the victim with them. One of the claw hammers was actually dripping blood. So I went for a knife, and the bad guys said, oh, no, never mind, things just got too real, and they ran off. Great. In Canada, you draw a knife in self-defense. Whether you use it or not, whether you bloody the knife or not, you're in big trouble. Oh, my God. I also looked at Mexico. In Mexico, the answer seems to be, what do you mean people carry a knife? You know, my Mexican accent there was extremely bad. But basically the whole idea of knife carry has been completely driven out of their culture. Whether that's by the laws or corrupt cops or whatever, I couldn't tell you. But basically nobody carries a knife in Mexico, and it's considered an extremely bad idea. Okay, let's get into some details of what to do and what not to do. So one option, I've shown you multipliers, and most of the multipliers will have some small knife. This is the kind of thing that is probably one of the safest things to do. This is basically modern equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. You know, a lot of companies make things like this. This is a Gerber suspension that I picked up for $20 at a pawn shop in perfect condition. I love it. It's got your usual collection of screwdrivers and bottle openers. There's a scissor in here. There's a serrated blade. There's more screwdriver stuff. Oh, is it? Let's see. Phillips screwdriver right here. Good stuff. Something like this. Wonderful as a tool. Not so great as a self-defense item. If it's not clear yet, I'm recommending a knife that is a dual use tool and self-defense system. I do believe that a knife is, in some cases, a potentially valuable self-defense weapon. I'll tell you right now. This is something that I found at a knife shop inside a truck stop. But it wasn't the truck stop itself. There was an actual knife store in there. And I had lost another knife, and I needed something fast. And this looked okay. Now, the sheath is absolutely horrible. Even with it locked in position, I can actually draw the knife. There we go. Yeah, I can actually draw it. And the worst thing I can say about this sheath is that it has no central plastic core. So under the wrong type of situation, you could run the tip right through the side of it, and you're like, no, the sheath is completely horrible. The knife's not bad, but it's cheap steel. Probably a little bit better than a butter knife, not much. The biggest problem with it is the blade length is 4.5 inches. And as I started to study the knife laws of enough states, for example, in Connecticut, felony city, right there. So I said, no, hold on, I need something smaller, and higher quality would be nice too. I was over in the Gatlinburg, Tennessee area at the Smoky Mountain Knife Works, and I came across this little bad boy. Oh, I should explain something before I start. Before I continue. This knife, the reason I was willing to accept this sheath is I have never worn it. Absolutely never. I do my own leather work. This is part of a sheath system that I had made for it, and fits nice and tight. This is just one piece of leather on top of another, and there's an extra layer of leather along where the cutting edge goes. So the blade, the cutting edge, goes against leather instead of against cord. And I made this in a fairly short period of time. Right now it's not complete. It's actually been taken off of something else, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. I may punch some more holes in this later and have it as a backup or something. I haven't decided what to do with it. I haven't actually touched this thing in a few months. 4 or 5 months since I've actually touched this thing. But I don't care about sheath quality because I do a lot of my own leather work. I'm going to talk about that subject a little bit. I was over at Smoky Mountain Knife Works. Let's talk about something better. This turns out to be not adequate for reasons I'll get into, 2 of them. This is an Elk River brand, which is fairly cheap, unfortunately. But here's the interesting part. Little gut hook. Now, you think, gut hook, that's something you see in a hunting knife for skinning a deer or something like that. Well, guess what it also is very, very effective at, and I've done some tests with it. It's a seatbelt cutter, guys. It's a very good seatbelt cutter, turns out. So this kind of thing, I liked it because of the wood handles. It looks, kind of rustic, kind of had a folksy look to it, as opposed to modern and tactical like this bad boy. So I had it in a kind of a similar sheath to this one, and it was better, but it's got 2 problems. The blade quality is not that good. Better than a butter knife, but not that much. So it took a couple of nicks on just normal light use. I sharpened it a couple times, and I decided, you know what, I can't really trust this steel because it's able to go and snap on me. So about a week ago, So, and again, oh, by the way, talk about sheath. Better, it's made of actual leather. It actually retains the knife in the sheath pretty well with a snap. That's all pretty cool. But it's got a problem. If for someone who sits down a lot, look at how far below the belt it's going to hang. And we think about sitting in a truck, you know, it's going to fold and poke into the seat a little bit. Might even poke through the leather and into your company issue truck seat. Boss won't be happy with that, obviously. But it's also going to be slow to get to while seated. And that's something I didn't tolerate, so I made a custom sheath for this as well. Don't have it in front of me because I've torn it apart and reused the pieces of it in the newest sheath I built, which you are going to see, that I'm wearing now. But not on me at this moment because I want to film it, but what I daily carry now. This is what I found next, and I'm very happy with it that I did. I was in a Bass Pro looking for a knife similar to this one, but better quality, and I knew about the Gerber Moment. The Gerber Moment is a gut hook knife again, has a better quality steel, has a better grip, better feel in the hand just all around. The steel is basically equivalent to your 420 high carbon family, 440A if you remember that one, or what Cold Steel used to use for a long time, AUS6, AUS8 family steel, which means edge holding isn't great. It's good, but not great. But it's tough. It's not going to snap on you in any kind of emergency use, which is good. Another big difference in this baby and that Elk River gut hook Skinner is this has an actual steel point. You can see it here. There, I'll get you a good view of it. Steel point here, it's a good window breaker. Bam. Is something like this usable as a self-defense tool as well? Oh yeah, absolutely. For one thing, that steel point, you whack somebody upside the head with that end, you can stop a fight faster than you can with that end, believe it or not. Is that deadly force? Oh yes. Oh yes. You don't do that lightly. You don't reach for something like this until it is absolute emergency. Now, the blade length on this and this are interesting because they're both actually the same reach as you're holding it because of the shape of the grip. This is an interesting example because of a knife grip because it gives you more reach to reach out and touch if you have to, but the actual legal blade length is shorter. But both of these are under 4 inch, and you measure blade length for legal purposes as stabbing penetration depth, not cutting edge length. Although some states will specify cutting edge length when they set a blade length limit, but most states they'll call this point here the blade length limit, or in this case somewhere around right here, so this turns out to be the same cutting edge length as the blade length, but the reach is right in the same ballpark. I'll put them in front of the black, and I'm holding my fingers exactly parallel, and you can see they're right on the same reach. Cool. Now, the weird thing about this is it came as a 2-knife set. And for on sale at Bass Pro, I think right now for $29.99, so 30 bucks. This little guy is really nice as a food prep knife. Self-defense tool. It's pretty minimal. You could, in theory, use it that way, but mainly it's a nice dinner knife that's not going to freak anybody out, which is a good thing. Nothing wrong with having that. This is an example here where the stabbing penetration depth is way longer than the blade length, but still we're well within the reach of what a cop would be concerned about. Well under, hopefully. So let's talk sheaths for these two for a moment. You're going to laugh at this, but this is my sheath. Belt loops go here. It's actually got room for that same multiplier. And blade stuff's there. Blade stuff's there. We also have a couple spare batteries for the flashlight. Yeah, that's a flashlight. So this goes onto my left hip, left side of my body, and I can turn the flashlight on without taking it out of the sheath, and it's like having a headlight sitting on my left hip. Oh, and this is the coolest, tire air gauge. I told my boss, you know, yes, I'm checking the tires. Hell, I don't even put my pants on without having an air gauge. I'm not kidding. It really marks this as a trucker's rig. So, what am I doing here? Well, let me explain something. Let's compare, because these are, as you saw, the same basic size. I'm going to reholster this thing. Okay, let's compare where the knife is going. I'm hanging it by the same belt loop location. So as you can see, I've raised the entire knife way up higher on the belt. That means I can sit down with it and there's no contact with the seat, there's no interference with the seat, no nothing. And that means, in turn, that I can get to it with my right hand or my left hand while seated. Why is that important? Well, if somebody's crashed a minivan in front of me, and I have a choice between hitting that minivan and killing a whole family or putting my truck in the ditch, my wife and I have actually discussed this. I'm probably putting the truck in a ditch. There's a pretty good chance that truck's going to end up on its side. There's other ways I could end up in the ditch. Obviously, I could screw up too. What the hell? Either way, I don't deserve to die in a fire because I can't get myself out of my chair, I can't get my wife out, can't get through the windshield, etc. If I get in a rollover accident and I'm wearing this on my left hip, if I break one or the other arm, I'm going to be able to get to that knife right there, and I'm going to cut the seatbelt with it. I'm going to get myself out of my seat, get my wife out of her seat, and I'm going through the front windshield of the truck, and I'm going to walk away and drag my wife out with me. Okay? It's going to happen, even if I'm down an arm. Okay, if I got two broken arms, okay, I'm going to get to the knife and I'm going to hand it to her and hope she can help. But two broken arms, not quite as likely, hopefully. This whole rig is surprisingly comfortable up against the body. Now, in the links below this video, I'll show you some still image pictures of what it looks like when worn. Now, legality speaking, remember Maryland? They wanted business use for you to have a knife on you? Well, yes, officer, that's my emergency rescue tool if I roll the truck or come across somebody else crashed or whatever. And for a professional trucker, they'll probably buy that. They should. Probably buy it in Canada as well. Well, what's that one? Well, it came with the other one for real cheap, and, you know, I often have to, you know, cut some food stuff around the truck, and, you know, so I just put that in there too. But, you know, that thing, nobody's going to call that a major deadly weapon. It's too, especially if you choke up on it. It's tiny. It's like 2.5-inch cutting edge. And by the way, if you're not aware, having a food prep knife that is a fixed blade is a good thing as opposed to a folding knife, because the inevitable problem with a folding knife is you will get food particles in the joint of the knife as it opens that you can't clean properly, and you'll use it one day and get some old food cooties dropped on what you're about to eat, and you'll be puking for a few days. There's no such thing as a professional chef's knife that fold for that reason. So having a food prep knife with you that isn't going to scare anybody. I mean, if you're in a Chinese restaurant and they serve pork chops or something, American food in among the Chinese food, but they don't bother to provide a knife because their culture doesn't believe in table knives, and you pull that out in a Chinese buffet, nobody's going to panic. And pull that one out, well, it's not huge, but yeah, somebody might get slightly concerned. So it's worth having around. Plus, both my wife and I might be eating together in the truck, and she might need her knife. Okay, here, honey, got a spare for you. So, I like having it around. Is it necessary? No. You could absolutely function with just, they will sell you this alone, the big one, with the gut hook, alone for like $27, or for $30 you get it with both. So well, at Cabela's it's right now $32, so somewhere between $3 and $5. You get the secondary knife as well. Oh, you should go for it. Oh, by the way, let me backtrack 1 second. I forgot to mention, this knife looks as bad as this one, but it's actually not. It's got hard plastic inserts in there that prevent the blade from jabbing out of the nylon and poking your ass. So that's a good thing. But again, it would ride far too low. Look at how low that tip would be. Let me break my phone. Okay, look. I'm lining up the belt loops here and here. Here, my tip of both knives was way up here. If I was wearing the factory sheath, that's about a 5-inch rise. 4 or 5 inches at least. No, 5. Easy. Higher on my belt. Higher ride rig. If I want to conceal it, if I throw in any kind of a light jacket that comes to just below belt level, this vanishes. Disappears. This, not so much. Okay, and that might be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what state you're dealing with. In general, I would say go ahead and open carry this, or a knife in this class, and you're less likely to get in legal trouble if you haven't checked into the knife laws of every possible state you're running in. I'll note one other thing. This sheath came from this big sheet of leather that I've had for quite a long time. 4 years ago, I made myself a cell phone case out of the same sheet of leather. Same one. I've had this for like 6, 7 years. I don't do a lot of leather working. And this is what it's aged to over about 5 years of use. Look at the patina that it's developed. And this is suede out, not suede in. That started as suede, but it's just worn smooth and brown. And honestly, I think it looks awesome. And so this will wear to this kind of tone over a period of years. And I'm happy enough with this that I think it will eventually age to that kind of level. Because this combination, one of the things about the rubber grips is the knives stick into the leather. They get gripped by the leather, I should say, better than anything else I've used. Originally, I thought I might take these rubber panels off of this knife because they unbolt and peel away and cord wrap it, but no, once I held the Gerber Moment series, the feel in the hand of this, I got to tell you, it's just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So for a sub 4-inch knife, it's legal in, I believe, all 50 states, and I have not encountered another. I'll show you one other, oh, I almost forgot to mention this one other thing. If you're cutting clothes off of a crash victim, because of the shape of the blade and the shape of this blunt thing right here as part of the gut hook, you can push it under someone's clothes without cutting the victim. See what's happening? The tip isn't digging into my arm, so I could cut victims' clothes off to get to a wound and hopefully patch it up some if it's bad enough, without cutting the crash victim. It's another reason why I believe, between all the other features it's got, seatbelt cutter, glass breaker tip, and just a generally useful solid knife, it can also be used to cut clothes off a crash victim. I was going to talk some about custom leather working, but I think we've gone too long. We've almost hit 30 minutes, so I'm going to shut down. These kinds of tools at Tandy Leather, I might talk about them in a separate video, or $5 each or less. It doesn't cost a lot to get into custom leather working as a hobby and do a rig like this. And you don't have to do this inner layer in the flashlight. You could make one of these kinds of sheaths with just like one knife in the air gauge, or whatever you want to do, whatever combination of stuff you want to put on it yourself, really cheap. You can get into it for $20, $30 and make all kinds of things, cell phone cases, and experiment with different rigs. I've made versions of this kind of thing that hold a little cell phone, headphone pouch goes in there, so that when I go into get something to eat, I've got my headphones for my cell phone stuffed in behind there. I've put all kinds of things in here. But I like this combination right here. It works very well for me. So I've talked enough, and I hope I've given you some things to think about. It is a strange subject because you have to try to be compatible with the laws of 50 different states. And you never know what state you're going to go into next, and you don't know what you're going to have to deal with next. And this is my answer.